And welcome to this edition of the Native News Update on this Tuesday, May 3rd. I'm your host for today's program, Paul DeMain. And today we talk with Shoshone Bannock correspondent Mark Trahant from Fort Hall, Idaho. We talked to him a little bit about the capture of Osama Bin Laden, the elections in Canada, which have apparently installed 4 Native or Indigenous MPs, and a bunch of other odds and ends having to do with federal and state government. Join with us right now. Mark Trahant, interesting. You've got the eyes on Washington, D.C., whether it's healthcare, whether it's budget, whether it's policy. Big to-do about the capture of Osama bin Laden. And unfortunately, a little bit of negative feedback from the Indian community. I think, like 2-3 weeks ago, someone got caught comparing Seminoles to terrorists during the Iraqi invasion or the U.S. invasion, I think, of Kuwait or Iraq some few years earlier. A general got up there and says, "Today we went into Indian country and retrieved one of our pilots that was down." What's going on? My understanding emerging, this code word for Osama bin Laden was Geronimo. Why didn't they call him Washington, D.C. or George Washington or George Custer or something like that?
Who knows? In fact, the code was Geronimo, KIA, killed in action. It's very interesting. There's a long history of this in the military. As you know, Indian country itself is a term that the military has used. It was the common term for Vietnam and was quite commonly used. In fact, in 1977, a young John Kerry testified before the Senate returning from Vietnam and talked about how a Native American colleague of his took umbrage to the term Indian country, but then more important, looked at the people of Vietnam and said, you know what, they're doing the same thing here that they did to us. So that tension with the military is a very old one.
I've heard some people explain that part of where that mentality comes from is a historic study type of approach. That is, if you go to West Point to train to be an officer, you will study swamp warfare amongst the Everglades, amongst the Seminoles in the U.S., mountain warfare, desert warfare, northern woods warfare, ice warfare in Alaska, that if you take the indigenous populations and study their resistance over the course of 200 or 300 years, that you will get every potential battlefield possibility that exists in the world. And therefore...
That's right. That's exactly what they did back then.
Okay. And so how do we get... I mean, I have a hard time imagining that, for example, President Obama, as much as he was... ecastic about the capture of Osama bin Laden, that at some point he had to have learned that, they were using this code name for him.
I'm sure at some point he heard it for the first time, and you'd think an adopted Crow Indian man would immediately take umbrage, but apparently he didn't. Maybe it's a lesson. Maybe this is an opportunity, if it gets through the White House channels, for folks to take a look at this and really think through what these words mean, because they do have meanings beyond what they intend.
Indeed. It's almost like having people come and say, look we've got a redskin painted on the wall, so he's got the wrong nose, this great big bridge up here and all that, but we're honoring you.
Right, exactly.
All the things that sports fans do during these types of activities doesn't make any difference. We're honoring you. So we have Black Hawk helicopters and Apache missiles or whatever they are, and terrorist code name Geronimo, and the Seminoles are named flat out.
Right.
The equivalent of Al-Qaeda at the time.
Right. And I mean, it's really, for a lot of reasons, unfortunate. But one of the most unfortunate things is, by doing this, it makes people forget that people in this country were fighting for their homeland. And that makes it a very different situation than almost anywhere in the world. I guess it's similar in that sense to Vietnam. But when you're fighting for your homeland, it takes on a whole different connotation.
Right. Well, it's like if there was an invasion, if Canada invaded the United States and we fought them back, everyone that helped out with that would be considered patriots and nationalists and all
Right.
that kind of a thing, rather than defending themselves. Well, that's go
Let
ahead.
me interrupt. This is switching gears. You're supposed to do this, not me, but I don't want to
Right.
forget it. Um, there was a record number of natives elected to Parliament yesterday in Canada. Um,
I would say all this stuff becomes side issues to real issues. We're dealing with mascots, we're dealing with monikers. People get angry and they forget that in the meantime, the budgets are being cut. But let's talk about what happened in Canada. My understanding is it went to kind of like from the far right to the far left and skipped over the middle. Am I correct on that, or do I got a different
no,
perspective?
the Conservatives had a very slim minority government. Now they have a majority government, so they are in control, no question about it. But on the far left, they jumped over the middle party, the Canada's version of the Democrats. Excuse me, and recruited women, Native Canadians, Greens. I mean, they really put together a broad coalition. And the last number I saw was 4 Native MPs were elected, which is, you can imagine that in our Congress.
Was that all in the Liberal Party? You have the Conservative Party, you have the Social Democrats, and then you have what is considered the left to be the Liberal
No, the
Party?
Liberal is the mainstream. This is the new Democratic Party that brought folks in.
Okay, and it was the New Democratic Party that also seemed to have gained some strength out of Quebec, which is in the past secessionist kind of philosophy
Right.
out of there. Where are the MPs coming from? What parts of Indian country?
I'm going to have to look. I just saw it as a tweet, and it was really short. So let me get back to you on that.
Okay, let's take a look at that because I think that's progressive because in the last election in the United States, we lost a record number of
Right.
native candidates in the ouster of a lot of democratically controlled legislatures.
Exactly.
What's happened in D.C. other than Osama being caught? It seems like it's kind of quiet there. Are we in a lull? Paul Ryan and his Medicare proposal is going around, and people are getting flack all over the country. What happened?
Well, the next one building is the debt limit fight. And I actually wrote a column about that this week on why it matters to Indian country. If you remember all the fight we had to save $100 billion dollars and all the cuts that went through and how painful that was, if this debt limit service doesn't happen in a timely manner, interest rates could pipe up, and a tick of 1 point wipes out really $400 billion dollars. So 4 times the fight we just had from interest rates. So it's pretty significant.
A little bit of good news out of D.C. They said they've been able to stave everything off from July to August because of additional increased tax revenues coming in. What's that mean? Things are beginning to move on the economy?
Yeah, the economy's picking up a little bit. Whether it holds or not, I think, is an open question. But yes, they've now got till August 2nd to actually resolve it.
August 2nd. You got it right down to the minute there almost, where we're going to run out of money?
Yeah, well, it'll probably change.
Right. Medicare, Social Security, untouched for many, many years. Proposal by Ryan. I bring it back up again. They floated this. There seems to be a lot of heated passion, not just from Democrats, but from Republicans on that particular proposal.
Right. There are 2 programs that are at risk, one Medicaid and one Medicare. Medicaid is important because it's a partnership with states. And what Ryan wants to do there is just give states a block grant and then say pay out of it. It has huge implications for Indian country because even though tribes are sovereign, they have to go through the states to get Medicaid reimbursement, even for Indian Health Service programs. So it has a big implication. Medicare, he wants to, quote, protect the program for people currently in it, but those who are 55 and younger will get a new program, which is basically a voucher. The irony of that is he essentially wants to give them something that looks like Obamacare for seniors.
What's Mitt Romney going to do when it comes to him running for president? And didn't he help pass universal health care in his state?
He did, although now he runs away from it, but that's right.
Interesting mix. How many people do we got announced already on the Republican ticket? About a dozen people, and the one guy with the wavy hair, Trump, is in the lead.
Trump. Who knows who's in the lead at this point? They have to get through Iowa, New Hampshire. I think this capture of Osama bin Laden probably helps the president's case as much as anything. And them not having a strong candidate at this point helps the president's case. So it's going to be an interesting election. And they're going to have to winnow down pretty soon to get a credible candidate.
It's indeed. And I think, like you said, the capture and death of bin Laden certainly adds something to his foreign policy after being criticized for not being strong in foreign policy.
Right.
Mixed reactions to it. Kind of, not unhappy about it, and not really happy about Osama bin Laden.
Right.
The justification for the killing of another human being who's killed human beings seems to be a kind of a terrible example of how we deal with things. An eye for an eye.
I agree. The night when it was on and people were cheering and stuff, I mean, I think it was the right thing to do. I think they ought to have. Ideally, the very best outcome would have been we arrested him and put him on trial and have him go through the justice system. But absent that, you don't want to let him get away. So killing him was necessary.
Right.
That said, I don't think it's a cause for celebration. It should be done with quiet dignity and respect because I just fear that those celebrations are going to go around the world and cause us more grief in the future.
Yeah. I agree.
Carry a big stick. Speak softly.
Well, was it Gandhi that said an eye for an eye only makes people more blinder to each other or something like that? Yeah. So, yeah, lots of good lessons this week. A lot of interesting political momentum across the country as people begin to, 18 months away, but people are already talking about these presidential candidates. A dozen people perhaps running on the Republican ticket. Nobody's going to challenge Obama.
It doesn't look like it.
Doesn't look like anyone's emerging
on.
Okay. It ought to be a nice season on the Republican ticket to see what happens with that and see if they go to the right or left or middle or where they come out. Canada's woken up to a whole new legislative branch up there. Do you see anything up in Canada that we should be keeping an eye
on? Probably more of the same because Harper's been in power already for some time now. So I'm not sure it'll be major changes, although he gets more power. So maybe he'll be emboldened to do new things. The thing about Parliament that's different from our system is they don't have the same checks and balances. If you're in government, you can basically do what you want until there's another election.
Which could be at any time, though, right? You have to keep that coalition together. Okay.
Yeah. You can have a vote of no confidence.
Indeed. We'll keep an eye on it. We want to know who those new MPs are and what they might be able to do. Stave off budget cuts, help support things, new legislation or whatever. Talk to you again soon, Mark.
Take care, Paul.
And that is the latest roundup of news from Indian Country. On this edition of the Native News Update, we want to thank you for joining with us and come back again soon.